Join us on this 12.5 miles kayak on the Wales coast from Newport to Fishguard on the 1st of May 2025. Watch on to learn about what it's like paddling on the Nevern and Estuary, the quaint coastal town of Newport, exploring the peninsula of Dinas Head, what inflatable kayaks we used on this trip, the amazing scenery along this part of the Pembrokeshire Coast, how the Hiqmar eFin electric kayak motor performed during the trip, and the historic port town of Fishguard. This 12.5 miles route on the North Pembrokeshire Coast took us from Newport down to Fishguard. We launched from Newport at 11 AM and explored the Nevern and Estuary. David joined us and we paddled down the coast and around Dinas Head. David left us at Pwllgwaelod and we continued down to Fishguard, where we landed at 4:30 PM. We're at Fishguard Harbour. It's about an hour before high tide. I haven't been to Fishguard for a while and I'd forgotten how nice it was. This is the Lower Town car park in Fishguard, right by the harbour. We're going to leave Archie's van at the end of the route and take my car up to Newport. We're at the Parog in Newport. That's not our kayak, but this is where we're going to launch from. And over on the right, that's Newport Boat Club. The town of Newport was founded by the Norman William Fitzmartin in about 1197. The old port area of Newport where we launched from is known as the Parog. There's an old lime kiln remaining, along with some original quay walls. We had the usual pre-launch photo with our Sandbanks Style Optimal inflatable kayak. We launched at 11 AM from the Parog at Newport and paddled upstream on the Nevern and Estuary. It seemed to be tandem kayak day at Newport, since we soon came upon several other tandem kayaks being paddled up the estuary. We're going to see how far we can paddle up the Nevern and Estuary. We're not sure, but we think about 1.5 miles. Newport has some great pubs for a post-paddle beer, including the Golden Lion, where we'd had some food and drinks the night before. On the day of the trip, it was high tide at about 10:30 AM. As with any estuary, when the tide is going out, the current starts to increasingly run faster downstream and the water levels gradually drop, exposing sandbanks and mudflats. I've done a full guide to estuary kayaking video on my kayaking guides playlist of my channel. We were paddling the Nevern Estuary up to 90 minutes or so after high tide, so the estuary was still relatively deep. As we'd predicted, about 1.5 miles upstream of Newport, the estuary gradually narrowed and we decided to turn around and head back downstream. The Nevern is quite a small estuary, so it's relatively safe to paddle when compared to some of the larger estuaries, when you need to be more careful about currents and tides. The day before though, when we landed at Newport not long after low tide, after paddling down from Cardigan, the river was too shallow to paddle up from the bay, so we'd had to get out and pull the kayak along upstream to Newport. When we got to Newport on the trip the day before, I recall the estuary largely being comprised of sandbanks and mudflats, and as with most estuaries, it's certainly not advisable to paddle it a couple of hours either side of low tide. On the day of our trip, the high tide was about 4.5 metres high. It was therefore a relatively big high tide, although I don't think that we could have got much further up the Nevern Estuary. In terms of logistics, on this trip we left a vehicle at either end of the route. If you only had one vehicle, then the T5 bus runs regularly between Newport and Fishguard. As you can see, the main channel runs alongside the northern side of the estuary, so it's best to follow this main channel when paddling it, since otherwise you might run aground on sandbanks. On the northern side of the Nevern Estuary is a long beach known as Cwm-Yr-Eglwys or Big Beach. An old crossing point known as the Chain still exists for anyone wishing to wade across the estuary to Cwm-Yr-Eglwys at low tide. We had arranged to meet David at the Parog back at Newport. The Parog at Newport is a nice spot to have a beer from Newport Boat Club and some food from the excellent snack bar next to it, while watching the sunset over Newport Bay, as we did after this trip. David met us at the Parog, having paddled up from Pwllgwaelod in his solo version of the Sandbanks Style Optimal inflatable kayak. We continued down the Nevern Estuary and out onto Newport Bay. This was David's first paddle with us, and it was great to meet him and engage in kayaking related chat. It was his maiden voyage in his Sandbanks Style Optimal solo kayak, and he was already very impressed with it, having previously only paddled hardshell kayaks. These Sandbanks Style Optimal kayaks are entirely made from drop stitch construction, so they inflate to a high pressure of up to 12 psi. As a result, the hull and the decks are very firm and rugged. I've done a full review of the Sandbanks Style Optimal kayak on the product reviews playlist of my channel. We find the Optimal kayaks to be very stable and easy to get into and out of. Maybe the best thing, of course, is that they pack away into wheeled backpacks, which you can stick in the boot of the car, so the portability and storage advantages are huge. We approached Cwm-Yr-Eglwys, which nestles on the northern side of Dinas Head. Cwm-Yr-Eglwys has a lovely sheltered beach. There's a car park and public toilets there, so it's another great landing or launching location if you were looking to paddle this part of the coast. We'd previously paddled around Dinas Head from Pwllgwaelod to Cwm-Yr-Eglwys and then carried our inflatable kayaks back along the path that runs between the two beaches across the neck of Dinas Head headland. St Brynach Church at Cwm-Yr-Eglwys was founded by St Brynach in 540 AD, and the present building dates from around 1400. We've had a short break at Hiqmar for a snack, and we're just heading off now around Dinas Head, also known as Dinas Island. Dinas Head is a peninsula jutting out into the sea, and it's a great part of the coast to paddle. It's teeming with bird life and seals, with lots of caves and gullies to explore. Looks like David is going to paddle in and explore that cave over there. There's loads of those gillibots and other seabirds whizzing about as we paddle around Dinas Head. The scenery along Dinas Head is amazing, with towering cliffs and panoramic views both down the coast towards Drumble Head and up the coast towards Cardigan. We follow David into one of the many caves which litter Dinas Head. We're going to backtrack quite quickly out of here because there's a seal in the cave over on the left hand side there. There goes David enjoying his maiden voyage in his Sandbanks Optimal kayak. Way to the south you can see the ferry going from Fishguard across the Rosslare in Ireland. It's great exploring all of the gullies and rocky outcrops around Dinas Head. We still hadn't used the Hiqmar kayak motor, other than briefly using it between Newport and Cwm-Yr-Eglwys to give David a demonstration of what it was like. We wanted to take our time exploring the inlets and caves around Dinas Head. Our plan was to use the motor in the second half of the trip between Pwllgwaelod and Fishguard. You have to be a bit more careful for rocks underneath the surface when using inflatable kayaks. However, I found the inflatables that we've used to be pretty tough, especially the full drop stitch ones like the Sandbanks Style kayaks, and I've not had any punctures despite brushing up against rocks on numerous occasions. We're coming into Pwllgwaelod beach, where David is unfortunately going to leave us as his car is parked here. We unfortunately didn't have time to call in the Sailors' Safety and Old Smugglers pub dating from 1593 overlooking Pwllgwaelod beach. Archie and I continue down the coast from Pwllgwaelod towards Fishguard, starting up our Hiqmar eFin electric kayak motor. The motor slides into a standard skeg slot on the hull of the kayak, and you connect it via the cable to the battery which you put on the floor of the cockpit of the kayak. Archie finds the battery useful as a little picnic table to have his lunch off on trips when we have our lunch breaks on the water. You turn it off and on using a wristband which connects wirelessly to the motor. You can feel the motor propelling yourself along almost instantaneously when you turn it on. The Hiqmar eFin kayak motor has 3 modes which are operated via the remote control wristband. Drive mode propels you along at about 2.5 miles per hour or 4 kilometers per hour. This is the mode you will use the most and keeps you cruising along at a reasonable speed. The battery will last about 4.5 to 5 hours when used in drive mode. Secondly, the sport mode, which pushes you along at about 4.5 miles per hour or 7.5 kilometers per hour. The battery will last about 1.5 to 2 hours when used in sports mode. Thirdly, there's reverse mode, which propels you backwards. I've only used reverse mode occasionally when I've needed to back out from somewhere. As with any sea kayak, it's wise to check the weather and sea swell forecast before going. We usually use surfforecast.com, which is linked below. On the day of this trip, the wind was about 5 to 10 miles per hour from the north. This meant that the wind was generally behind us. It's far easier to paddle with the wind than against it. The primary swell was only 0.2 meters, or about 0.6 foot, every 7 seconds or so. You can see the wall of the ferry port at Goodwick over there, which is just beyond Fishguard. The combined towns of Fishguard and Goodwick are on the North Pembrokeshire Coast, and each has its own harbour. Fishguard is famous for the last invasion of the UK when French warships landed nearby in 1797 with a large force of soldiers. The invasion didn't last long, and the force surrendered at the Royal Oak pub in Fishguard 3 days later. We landed at Fishguard Harbour at 4:30 PM near to low tide, so the harbour was quite empty of water. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing by clicking on the left below. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of videos of our other trips around the Wales coast.